welcome. I'm Diana Ziegler. I'm the director of the Interior Museum, and I'm happy to be welcoming Chief of Interpretation Ranger Vase. I can tell already this is going to be a great, very engaging talk. Lots of fun. Ranger Vase has had over 24 years of experience here with the National Park Service in interpretation. So predominantly his career here with National Park Service, part of the Department of the Interior. He is currently the acting director of National Parks East, as well as the chief of interpretation at Fort McHenry. So looking forward to focusing in today on the Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens, where botany meets history. Thanks, Ranger Vase.
So a little bit to continue my story, and then we'll segue right into here. And that is, I started working at Fort McHenry. Then, and my volunteer job was I dressed up as a soldier of the War of 1812 and portrayed a young recruit. And then eventually I became a full-fledged ranger, GS9 interpretive ranger. And for those of you that are not as familiar with National Park Service lingo, which might be like one individual in the back, because I see all the NPS hats and the logos and stuff, but interpretation is what I call storytelling. Whether we interpret or tell that story online, whether we tell that story this way, verbally, or, and all a movie, an exhibit, it's all storytelling, right? And it's all interpretation. So that's what chief of interpretation is. So did that at Fort McHenry, became the chief of interpretation. The superintendent at that time was Gay Vitsky. So if you are here on the mall, you may recognize that name because she's now the superintendent of the National Mall. So she too has come down here. And then what happened was a few months ago, the superintendent of National Capital Parks East, and I'll explain what that is in just a second, his name is Gopal Nujabal. He called the superintendent of Fort McHenry saying, hey, I know there's this Vince guy up there. He's kind of interested in expanding his horizons or whatever. And, could he come down for what they call a detail? So basically it's 120 days. And you come down. It's kind of like a substitute teacher, so to speak, all right? Except Nate was nice enough and didn't shoot spitballs at me the first day I showed up. And because the longest, because I was at Fort McHenry practically my whole life. I grew up there, and everyone's like, you'll never leave Fort McHenry. And then like the young lady said, I see you on TV, and I do the public information officer thing at Fort McHenry. And last year was off the chain because it was the year before that, 2014, the bicentennial of the War of 1812. We had the Blue Angels Air Show, and I was on TV like every other week promoting this and stuff. It was a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. Getting up at 3:30 in the morning wasn't fun, being on TV was fun. And then also we co-managed Hampton National Historic Site, which if you've never heard of it, is this great treasure north of Baltimore City, not Hampton Roads, Virginia, but it's in Baltimore County, just north of Baltimore City, right off of 695. And it's a plantation. It was a plantation, and its high point it numbered 25,000 acres. And it was a place where enslaved people worked. Over 360 enslaved people were there. It stayed in the same family, the Ridgely family, for about 6 generations. And literally since it was built until the Park Service acquired it after World War II. And so that's another hidden treasure. This year is all about Find Your Park. It is the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service. And so one cool thing to do, like my friend Roxanne here, she's like, we're going to visit every national park unit in the lower 48 states. Okay, that is a tough thing to keep up with. I applaud you. I really appreciate that. That's really cool. We call it job security. But if you can't do that, then my challenge to y'all is think of a park. Go online, discover it. Think of a park that maybe you never visited and you never heard about. Like Hampton National Historic Site, or here in D.C., Mary McLeod Bethune's house. That's a historic site. Like my buddy Nate works at Frederick Douglass. Everyone knows that guy. You know, I love the mall. Mall's great. I love the Lincoln Memorial, but everybody knows that. You know, find something that people don't know, and that segues into what we're doing here. So when I started, it was my second day on the job with the detail. I come into the office there, and I got an email from Miss Ziegler there, and it was like, you know, and I'm thinking, I don't want to screw this one up, all right? I want to do this good. So it's like, okay, I'm going to respond to these people fast. And so she was nice and wrote, can you or one of your staff do this presentation? I'm like, gosh, I don't even know how many staff I even got. I think the place is open, you know. And then the superintendent, he's like, it's right, you know, we're really short on numbers and stuff like that. I'm thinking, okay, well, what if we don't have the staff to send? What if I guarantee this thing and the person I want to send can't go? I guess I'll put myself on the hook because I got to know these stories anyway, and it'll also look good to my people. And I'll even make one of them come, and I did, and they came, you know, and stuff like that. They're like, hey, he's not just a paper pusher manager dude, which we have to do. I'm not abjuring that, and that's really, really important. But you got to know the stuff too, right? And so I figured, well, I was reading this really great book at the time. About a water lily. Ironically enough, my wife gave it as a Christmas present even before I came down here. And so when I went to Kenilworth, they said, hey, we got this. I said, do you have this lily? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, whoa, this is going to be good, you know. And then I just fell in love with the story, you know. But then next day, I'm over at Fred Dog, and I'm in love with that story too. So today, though, we're talking about Kenilworth. So if this is one of the parks you have not yet visited, make time to do it. I will put one last aside before we get into the meat of the presentation. Kenilworth really has two stories. You know, you were saying that you're here east for a while, and my recommendation was if you want to see all of the lilies and lotuses in bloom, come in the midsummer. Well, when I started, like February, you know, March, you know, I have to say Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Garden is nice, but it's, you know, you don't have the lilies and lotuses blooming. But, you know, like the old adage, they always say, Washington, D.C. was built on a swamp, you know, a tidal wetland. This is the last place in D.C. you can go and see that. You know, D.C. is all built up. We've totally paved over and eradicated practically every tidal wetland in the District of Columbia, except for this one. I'm told there's a few very postage stamp outliers on private property, but this is the only place in the District of Columbia that you can see the original tidal wetland that was ubiquitous here. And there's a whole natural history story. And in another life, I'm also a birder myself. And a friend of mine, his name, he actually was a long-standing, Jim Peters, elderly gentleman. When he said, hey, Vince, you're going down to D.C. for us? I said, yeah, Jim, I am. He says, when I was a young boy in the 1940s, that's where I birded. And I said, yeah. He said, I did Kenilworth, I did, you know, a bunch of other sites. And I said, really? Did you do bird by yourself? He goes, no, my dad and another guy birded. I said, who's the other guy? He said, Roger Tory Peterson. Oh, I said, you birded at Kenilworth with Roger Tory Peterson? He said, yeah. Roger Tory Peterson, during World War II, was with the Department of Camouflage in the Army, and they sent him to D.C. to work on all the camouflage schematic designs and stuff. It makes sense, right? If birds know how to hide themselves, and you know color, and you can identify color quickly, and so that's a neat aside. So this is an awesome birdie sauce. My advertisement is, if you can't go in the summer, go to Kenilworth in the winter and go and bird. If you live around here, go and bird, gravitate to the natural history of the site. So where botany meets history. So the story that doesn't begin in Kenilworth. All right. The story, what very people don't know, is the story of Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens is linked to the legend of El Dorado. You may say, the legend of El Dorado? What do you mean? Are you going to find a money? I don't know. But the legend of El Dorado. It begins with the person who first sought to find El Dorado. El Dorado was reportedly in South America. This German guy, Roger Schomburg, he was German. He wanted to make a name for himself. He was a great map maker. He was an explorer. He was also a botanist on the side. And what he did is he got a commission, not from any duke in Germany, not where he was from, but he also spoke English fairly well. And he got a commission from the Royal Geographical Society. Well, what was the commission? Well, his job was to go and explore British Guyana. The British recently acquired it as a possession of the mighty British Empire. It's the only piece that they owned that was in South America. All right? And even to this day, it's one of the few, if not the only predominantly English-speaking countries in South America. It had never been mapped. The British didn't even know how much, they kind of had a sense how much land they had, but they didn't know what the boundaries were. So, well, get the Geographical Society and do this on the cheap. So we'll send Schoenberg down there and he'll map the whole place out. All right. And it's reportedly that the legend of El Dorado, El Dorado is found in there somewhere, and he might find it. So that's where I say it's kind of linked. So that's where it's at. So there's South America, and here's a map of it. And I got this. I actually went out and got the print, the original 1843 map of British Guiana. All right, so there you go. And that was actually made off of Schoenberg's, drawings and sketches and map making. All right. So if you want to be an explorer, and this is like the early 1840s, if you ever want to do this, go back in time, be an explorer, and explore British Guiana with Schoenberg, there are pros and cons to this. The pros are Guyana is very scenic. If you're part of the British Empire, there's a lot of raw materials that can be had. There's a lot of trees. It's a good place to explore if you want to make a name for yourself and be famous. There are cons, though. There's mosquitoes. There's a lot of mosquitoes. Okay? There's malaria. And the Royal Geographical Society is cheap, so you wind up having to pay your own freight and then some. Okay? And there's rapids, so you better learn to swim and you better keep your stuff waterproofed, because a lot of the stuff he brought, the canoes keep flipping over. So what he decides to do is he begins up here in, actually I got the little pointer here, we're going to use it. In New Amsterdam right here. And this is the River Beach. He's going to go down and explore this. This is his first route. And I mean, it's almost like a Joseph Conrad novel. Like a heart. I mean, it's nothing but wilderness. And he's got a group with him, and they're in canoes, and they're fighting rapids. And like I said, the canoes flip over, and they go down until they stop. And then they develop this on Christmas Eve. And Christmas Day, they kind of camp out. They find this cataract, this waterfall. It's kind of impassable. On December 25th, I reached an impassable portion of the River Beach. I shall call it the Christmas Cataract. And then he also said some other things off the record. Wow, the place needs a slogan. How about Find Your British Guiana? Well, what's a cataract? And for those of us that don't use arcane 19th century terms, there's shallow lengths of whitewater rapids where the surface of the water is broken by many small boulders and stones jutting out in the river. And then the next day, after they get past it, he sees this blooming. It's twilight, it's on the River Beach, and he is blown away. It is the largest water lily that I would say white Europeans. Everyone says that humanity has ever seen, like, there are people that are living down there. You can't say that. But certainly that Europeans have ever seen. And in the age of the golden age of botanical exploration, 1840s, 1850s, that's when Charles Darwin was writing his stuff. And so what you're looking at is these enormous water lilies. They're like 4.5 feet wide. These blooms are as big as basketballs. And like I said, he's never seen anything like that. He knows that all the great British botanists never saw anything like that. He's come on a one-of-a-kind thing. So he's like, I know I have this mapping job to do, but I got to get this stuff back. So one thing he does to supplement his income is he takes orchids and he sends them back to rich British aristocrats and sells them off, because those were cachet too, but no one's ever seen anything like this. So he's like, stop the boat, he's collecting the plant. And then, of course, and this actually was the dialogue similar that happened. Dude, it's a canoe, where are you going to put it? So what they did was they had a salt barrel, and they stuffed the bloom in a salt barrel with some brine, and then rolled. You have to be careful with these lilies because they're razor sharp on the bottom, almost like razor blades. So carefully roll it, and then they stuff that in. Of course, they get back, the thing's rotted anyway. You can see that it once was a plant. The bloom's brown, it's kind of half decayed, but you could see it was a bloom. So he makes sketches and sends those back too. And this creates a sensation. This is a time where in Great Britain, do you ever wonder why in the Victorian era, young ladies had names like Lily, Rose, Flora? Well, people were really into this stuff. I mean, gardening was a passion. And especially as new plants worldwide were discovered and brought back, to England, they became the latest, coolest plant that everyone had to have, which really spawned a wave of people being interested. So, the Royal Geographical Society and Robert Schoenberg decided to do something very smart. There's a new monarch ascending the throne, and she is Queen Victoria, right? Everyone looks at the old picture of Queen Victoria. I want to show you the young Queen Victoria. And that's how she looked when this water lily is discovered. So guess what? If you're Robert Schoenberg or the Royal Geographical Society and you want to get famous, guess what? You get to name the sucker. So we're going to name it the Victoria. But you have to, usually you have two names. So it was the Victoria, and then they found some on the Amazon. So they said, well, what name is the Victoria Amazonica? Well, you can't put Queen Victoria's name because along with Amazons, because Amazons in Victorian age don't have exactly the best connotation. So they decided to call it the Victoria Regia Lily. And even to this day, it still has that name. And sometimes it's called the Victoria Amazonica. But it also did another thing. They built a special stove at Kew Gardens, which is the big British, conservatory over there. But also, the Duke of Devonshire had to have one too. So this is the Duke of Devonshire's personal greenhouse. Yeah, he was really doing all right, And he hired a guy named Paxton who was a botanist and a builder. So this guy Paxton, who worked for this British Duke, designed the greenhouse specifically so he could have a big stove, so they could have a big tank to display this big water lily. Then 1851 rolls around, and they hire Paxton to design the Crystal Palace. So the Crystal Palace itself indirectly comes from the Victoria Regia water lily, because they had to figure out to build a greenhouse big enough to display it, and then all they did was scale it up to build the Crystal Palace. And inside the Crystal Palace, if you look, they put all the curial cool things of the world, right? So we're going to put the Egyptian stuff in there. There's another wing that had all the latest inventions in there. And then down here, that's the lily. Okay, so it made its way. So and again, and of course, some say they talk, right? One cool walking lily, and when the British Empire Falls National Park Service should do something with that lily, all right? So there you go. So the Crystal Palace. So, a lot of times when we talk, a lot of us garden, a lot of us may like plants. Oh, plants are neat. Oh, plants are colorful. But my point of the talk is plants and culture are intertwined. And this is the first example. And we have this on display at Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens. If you come in the summer, you can see it. And it's even cooler because it's cooler when it's outside in a more natural environment. Here's, greenhouses, hothouses, they're neat. But it's also neat to see them outside. And you can come and you can see it outside. We're going to shift our story, though, to the United States, because this is America, and we have native water lilies in our own country. So shifting to the state of Maine, say around the same time, the 1840s. So the same time this Victoria lily is being discovered, up in Maine, in rural Maine, there's the Shaw family. And the Shaw family happens to be they're essentially poor farmers, and they live, they have some ponds, and in these ponds, these native lilies bloom. We have these at Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens too, the American white water lily, and also Nymphaea odorata, because they have a nice scent. So the other neat thing when you come is you can smell them in addition to seeing them. And then they smell good, they love New England, and they will grow almost anywhere. So they grow in here in Maryland, DC, they grow up, in other states as well. So Shaw, in the backyard of him and his family and all, they have these lilies. He sees them, he likes them, it becomes a thing. Resident Maine farmer, Civil War breaks out. He joins the 19th Maine. And the 19th Maine is then sent here to Washington, D.C. Because another park, again, find your park, is during the Civil War, to protect the Capitol, a whole 69, I memorized this, 69 forts were constructed in a vast circle around Washington, D.C. And a lot of them today serve as green spaces in communities, and they're placed community gardens. Fort Totten, if you see that on the Metro, that was one of the Civil War forts. There was another one called Fort Carroll, and he was stationed there. and life is quiet until 1864 when his regiment's called up and they go into the battle at Spotsylvania Courthouse. All Civil War battles were bloody. Spotsylvania is really high up on the list. What made it more bloody than the rest? Well, there's a particular, the way the battle played out, they called it the horseshoe. The Confederates had entrenchments, and one part of the trench was like a letter U, so imagine like a line, a letter U, and then a line. And so that became the center of the battle, and the Union guys had to take it. The Confederates tried to hold it. The Union guys won, but it was a full day in the downpour rain of almost solid hand-to-hand combat. These guys are almost at point-blank firing muskets. And to give you a sense of that, since we are in D.C., if you go to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History after this talk, you can see that tree from that battle. And that was right at the fulcrum of the battle where Shaw was. The tree was cut in half by musket fire. And if they didn't have machine guns. It's like, you pack the ground and do like that. So that gives you a sense of how intense this battle was. Shaw is a casualty. He has his right arm amputated. So they didn't call it like post-traumatic stress syndrome, but he had to have it. You couldn't be in a battle like that intense, be shot down, and then have your right arm literally sawn off and not gone through something mentally. So he does a few things, and this is what's so inspiring that I love about the story. What does he do? He reinvents himself. Maybe some of you have reinvented yourselves in your life. First, he teaches himself to write with his left hand. This is literally 2 weeks ago, a descendant sent me an email out of the blue. Actually sent my buddy Tina over there. Tina, put your hand up. Hi, Tina. She is one of the honchos of the Friends of Kenilworth Aquatic Arts. And Tina, she forwarded it to me. This is Shaw's journal written with his left hand. He's writing better in his left hand than I do in my right hand, okay? And then you can see, and then he starts planting. He buys land along the Anacostia River near his father-in-law's house. It's cheap. It's so cheap because it's swampy that they throw like, have an extra 15 acres. You're not going to do nothing with that anyway. So so he gets a job with the Treasury Department, but maybe as a way of remembering home in Maine, maybe as a way of coping with his post-traumatic stress syndrome, he starts planting these water lilies in little ponds. And it works because all you got to do is dig a little bit, and it's a natural wetland anyway, so it fills with water, right? And so he gets into that. So he works for the Treasury Department. And this is the neat thing where D.C. is a big place, but it's also a small place. So he was hired, and he made the top of the cert. Boom. But one of his co-workers was Charles Redmond Douglas. So one of Frederick Douglass's sons is working directly with him. How cool is that? And also Walt Whitman is working in the Treasury Department at the same time as well. And they're all Civil War vets. Don't forget Fred Douglass's son saw that action down at Battery at Fort Wagner. So they're probably swapping combat stories and things. And then here, Anacostia Park, another park, find your park. So Walter Shaw's Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens is here. Frederick Douglass's house is here. So these guys are, kind of neighbors. They're living on the same river, the river of history. I'll also put a plug in that we are finishing up the Anacostia River Trail. So in another few months, you will be able to bike ride or walk from down here where the Anacostia flows into the Potomac all the way up to Bladensburg. Think about that. I want to open this up. We should open it up on the 25th, on the Park Service's birthday, is like the gift to the people. That would be really, really cool, And, of course, Treasury Department's there. I just bring this up because it's neat how history is so interconnected. Culture and nature, people, how lives intersect, right? So then it becomes a pastime. So Walter B. Shaw, his wife, they have kids, they plant the flowers, they enjoy it. He's working with the Treasury Department. Friends come and visit. And they walk around the gardens. Then it becomes a thing that other locals come by to see the flowers. And then it becomes a thing where it's just like, Mr. Shaw, I really like those flowers. Can I have some seeds? Oh, sure, Mr. Vince. Yeah, here, have some seeds. Oh, that's great. Hey, I got my girlfriend. Can I have a couple flowers? Oh, yeah, sure, Joe. Have some flowers. And it becomes a thing. And then he starts selling a few. And they sell more. Then they sell even more. Eventually, it becomes a business. So they hired people, and they hired African Americans as well as white folks. And I wonder, if you look at like racism and prejudice that was here, because this is the South, man. And it was like a thing when Frederick Douglass and Frederick Douglass' son and Shaw were working together. Shaw was writing like in his diary, some people were saying, gosh, you got these black guys working here, but I think people are going to move past that, And clearly Shaw didn't have a problem with it. So Shaw doesn't have a problem hiring African Americans to work in the Kenilworth Aquatic Garden. So in a way, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say 1870s, 1880s, he's got an integrated workforce, and he's one of them. And his daughter's picking up on this. Now his daughter's name is Lucy, but she likes to go by the name Helen. And so eventually he quits the Treasury Department because there's more money in selling flowers. Well, how much money, Ranger Bennett? He made $1,000 an acre. Yeah. Now I'm not saying that's a translation. That's $1,000 in the 1870s, which is like umpteen thousand now, And there were a few, they had like 5 or 6 acres, so it wasn't like hundreds of acres, but still there was serious money to be made in this. This is what it looked like in the early 1900s, and it still looks a lot like that today. And then they made deliveries. So one, if you go back here on a hot, balmy July or August day when the lotus and the lilies are in bloom, it became a thing. Gosh, it's hot. You know what? If you take the Kenilworth streetcar, and you can almost imagine the ladies in their parasols and the gentlemen in their boater hats, and of course Shaw's are going to encourage this. No entrance fee. Come and enjoy. Come and see the garden, because I know you're going to buy some stuff. And other people tend to go, like in the 19-teens, there's a guy, his name's Woodrow Wilson, and he goes, President of the United States. Calvin Coolidge goes out there, Harding goes out there, and numerous senators and representatives. It becomes a thing to go out there to the Shaw Gardens, right? And then, here's the neat thing, his daughter, Helen, she's like, we're going to make deliveries. Well, we don't want to hire delivery drivers. So Helen Fowler is the first woman in the District of Columbia to get a driver's license. So we have women's history, ladies and gentlemen, here. And we have a photograph, and that's her in the truck. How cool is that? So like if you're in D.C., you're driving around the Shaw Garden. There you go. Aquarium plants, to be had. And then she takes over the business. When Dad becomes very elderly and it's tough keeping it up, and then when he passes, she takes over the business and runs it. And this is 1921. That's about July 1921. It's the year that she really took over the business. But I just want to say, woman-owned business. No. Listen to this. Mrs. Lucy Helen Fowler, whose signature appears. Now, this is by the head botanist of the United States Department of Agriculture. Curator of the United States National Herbarium, is about to make a journey to the West Indies and northern South America. So exactly what Schomburg did back in the 1840s, including visits to botanical gardens. As a commercial grower of water lilies and maintains at Kenilworth, District of Columbia, the most successful establishment of that kind in the United States. Okay, so when I was there, the ranger Robert said, one time it was the most successful in the country. I'm like, how do you know that? And he goes, well, we've just been saying it all the time. Like, okay. And then we went through the documents and found it's like, okay, so the head botanist for the Department of Ag is saying it, so I agree with it. Named after the father who founded them, Mrs. Fowler has always shown every courtesy to botanists visiting her establishment and has extended to them cooperation and assistance in various botanical enterprises. I trust that the directors of botanical gardens visited by Mrs. Fowler will extend to her all possible courtesies afforded by their institution. A letter of introduction. So this isn't some gal that just took over from there. This is a woman that's actually running the foremost water gardens in the country as a business, interfacing with leading naturalists around the world. The collection at Kenilworth is kind of respected up there, like with the collection at Kew, so much that one of the flowers named after her, it was actually exhibited in Kew Gardens in England. And they do different things. They hybridize. They invented the pink opal water lily, which you can see. They invented the pink beauty, which is kind of a different hue of water lily, which you can see. But I also think it's interesting how culture and the flowers themselves intersect. For example, I found this from a 1914 catalog. They introduced and hybridized the suffragette. So the Nymphaea is kind of like the genus, family, species, kind of like the family name. And it was a white lily. And of course, the way they bred it to kind of get a really white tincture out of it, then they named it the suffragette. Just kind of like the guy, the Victoria Regia, the Nymphaea suffragette, 1914. 1913, though, is one of the largest suffrage parades ever held in the United States of America, and it's held in the District of Columbia. You can't tell me they didn't know anything about that. You can't tell me that the daughter who took over that business, who was hybridizing these things by that time, didn't ping on that. And you can't tell me that the fact that it's white and all the suffragists, not suffragettes, suffragists, are wearing white. Think about it. Again, where botany meets history. The General Pershing happens to come out in 1917 when the United States gets involved in World War I. General Pershing, commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force over in Europe. Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, it's also a day-blooming tropical. That's in the catalog too, the General Pershing. You can still buy that, by the way. I know you said you keep your flower gardens. Go ahead, General Pershing. Suffragette, we may have to hook you up, okay, with the seats. So again, military figures, social movements. William Stone, the William Tricker Nursery. The National Park Service does not run Kenilworth as a place where we buy and sell lotus and lilies, but the Tricker Nursery still is in operation. So if you're inspired to start your water garden of your own, that might be a site. That's the oldest continuously operating one, and they interfaced with the Kenilworth Gardens back when the Shaws and Fowlers were running it. And even to this day, we still have the William Stone in our collection. And just like, you said you operate the Department of Interior Museum and you have badges. Well, in our Park Service, here, the plants are our collection. That's our collection, too, Lotus versus lily. Okay, so I've been talking about lilies, but I also said we have lotuses. So what's the difference? So here's something you can do. You can impress your buddies at your next dinner party, okay? So one, how do you know the difference? So when you go to Kenilworth, one, lilies tend to be right level with the water. Leaves are on the water, a lily pad, like an old frog sitting on a lily pad. Not every lily, but many of them, and certainly in the United States, our native ones, the blooms are also level with the pad. There are some tropicals, though, that do extend up, but the native ones are level with the pad, level with the water. The other thing with the lotus, they always extend up, and they extend up pretty high. The other thing that's really neat is the leaves, they grow up, but they don't lay on the surface of the water. They're almost like a solar panel. Like, if you go, and now these days we put them on our houses, we park, they're tilted, right? So you get that sun. Well, Mother Nature was doing that before we invented that. So, they tilt and they kind of rotate around toward the sun. The leaves are very fragile. If you mess around with them, they'll start to turn brown because the way they tilt, not only do they collect the sun really well, but when it rains, the rain flashes right off. So if I put my waders on and I went into there and I started messing around with them and cutting them, I could disrupt the leaves pretty bad so that they start collecting the water instead of letting it flash, and then you get mold, and then they get infected and they die. So you got to be real careful with your lotuses, but they grow in great profusion at Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens there. So the lotus versus the lily. One other tidbit about lilies: there are day blooming ones and ones that bloom at twilight. So this is a day blooming one. The edge is smooth. That Victoria Regia, the edge was, serrate, like teeth. And if you go to Kenilworth and you see the teeth ones, they always bloom at night. So there you can say, if you're with your friend, you can say, that's a night blooming lily. Really? How do you know? Well, I just know these things. But again, how do they relate to culture? The lotus is the national flower of India. And we have it at Kenilworth. It's actually called, the official name is the Sacred Lotus, and it's pink. The other way you can also tell lotus from the lily is the inside. It looks like a shower head. Once it blooms, the seed pod looks like a shower head. And if you go there, like in the wintertime, you'll see it looks like a whole bunch of like seed pod shower heads laying all over the place. Those are all lotus, from the lotus flowers. So here, this is Lakshmi. And so, well, who's Lakshmi? So I'm not a Hindu, but I did read up on this. If someone is a Hindu, I would appreciate, if you want to add to it. But basically, Lakshmi is the spouse, and I use Vishnu. And Lakshmi basically is a goddess, and she is like, it's kind of like a personification of a man and wife. She's like the personification of a wife. But what's interesting is she's the one who's responsible for, like, not exclusively, but in large measure, prosperity, success. And that is success both professionally and in the home. So in a sense, she helps her husband become a success. So maybe that's a little bit different than like in the Western way. Well, the guy's going to do it all, and he's going to be everything all. Here he does, but he does it best with her. And so, and for her, you can see, as a deity, she's always seen sitting on a lotus and holding lotus. So what does the lotus have to do with it? Well, the thing is, in here, the lotus, and you'll see this at Kenilworth, some of our pools are really, really clear. Some of our pools, not so clear, kind of muddy. But the lotus will do very well in either one. So in a sense, the metaphor is, well, maybe you were born to a rich background, but maybe you were born to a poor background. You both can flourish. The lotus can flourish in a muddy environment. It can flourish in a nice, pool that's, you can see the bottom of it. So flourish and bloom where you are planted. Don't go blaming it on other stuff. You do it yourself, like the lotus, Another thing you sometimes see is the lotus is the personification of man. And we'll move to that, and you see that here in Hindu, but you also see it in Buddhism as well. So that's Lakshmi, and then the guy god is Vishnu, and they complement each other. And you always see Lakshmi with the lotus. Vietnam, it's also the national flower. The lotus is the national flower of Vietnam, and it's the same lotus, the sacred lotus. And then this is actually from a museum in Vietnam, a replica of Buddha, 14th, 15th century, rising from the lotus. And so in a sense, in Buddhism, the idea is, and this is why you see Buddha coming from it, is that man or humanity, you transcend the muck and the mire and bloom into something that's very beautiful. You kind of get beyond all of that and you transcend it. So that's why he's rising out of the mud, rising out of the weeds, rising out, to bloom and realize your full potential. So again, pretty flowers. Flowers, though, relating to two major religions of the world, two large cultures of the world. I mean, India, I think, has the second highest population next to China in the world, okay? So flowers and fun, important stuff. Back to Kenilworth. So Helen Fowler takes over after her father. It runs it very prosperously. And here's the receipts, because I know, in case you're curious, in 1927, she's making around $12,000 gross receipts. So this is another part, though. Park Service is busy in preservation. A lot of times you go to national parks, you see the ranger giving a talk, but preservation and keeping all this around is a major part of our mission. And she was not only the first woman to drive and a businesswoman, but she arguably was the first preservationist because of here at Kenilworth. She is probably the main reason why the Park Service even has all this. Because you see, in the 19-teens and the early 1920s, the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, I like the Army Corps of Engineers. I really like all the flood remediation they do. But what they wanted to do was to contain the Anacostia. And to contain the Anacostia, that meant we're going to drain off all that wetland, which is just useless anyway. These flowers are going to have to go. And we're just going to either make her an offer or, declare eminent domain and get the gardens out of here. Helen Fowler does not take this line down. So she launches initially a one-woman crusade by herself. And I will read this to you because I think her personality comes through in this one letter. So she's writing back to the Army Corps of Engineers. While, as I said, so she shows how much she makes, she does full disclosure. While, as I said before, this giving up is a hardship, I realize that I must bow to the inevitable. But, and she underlines it and capitalizes it, the fact that not only the property, presumably ours, she had to stick that in there, but the entire business and equipment is to be taken without compensation, underlined, is to my mind the very acme of injustice. And then to underscore the point, am I not right? You know, help out. But she also happens to talk to people like President Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, all those senators and businessmen. And so they go back, and what you find is the Army Corps of Engineers has to keep going back and doing studies. We're going to postpone this project. We're going to kick this can down the road. We're not going to do it. And eventually, in 1938, the project was abandoned altogether, and the property was acquired for about $15,000 by the National Park Service, United States Department of the Interior. What's really cool is Ms. Fowler still is allowed to live there, and she can conduct her business until she dies. And she doesn't die until the early mid-1950s. So if you were a visitor there during World War II, you can see Ms. Fowler, you can see a ranger, and there's the Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens. The interesting thing, far-famed water gardens expected to become public showplace. Favor of Anacostia, swampland, claimants, court issues an injunction, water lily saved by decree. So, I mean, the fact that she did that, saved it, and now the National Park Service is the stewards of this special piece of ground. And not only the collection of the flowers, but also, like I said, the last really ecosystem of that pristine wetland that used to be ubiquitous here at the District of Columbia. And the Park Service established a Botanical Research Institute there. I did not know this until 3 weeks ago. I went there and I'm walking through these greenhouses with the maintenance team, and I'm like, why do we have such lavish greenhouses? Well, there used to be a research institute here, because there's also a lot of rare tree species there, and I started picking them out. Why do we have a Frankliniana tree? There's only 1,400 of them in the world. Why do we have one at Kenilworth? Well, they used to do the botanical research here. I'm like, oh. And as part of the research institute, they found a 50,000-year-old lotus seed, and they got it to grow at Kenilworth. And its progeny are still growing there. You can go there and see the progeny of this 50,000-year-old lotus seed. I can't keep some of my plants that I had 2 weeks ago alive, man. And the Park Service is getting some 50,000 years old to sprout. And then at the same pond is the Egyptian blue lotus. And you can see how you go. This is a photograph of the blue lotus at Kenilworth. Okay, so we took that picture. But then, if you go to Egypt, or if you go up to up to New York City, and and to some of the museums, and you see the hieroglyphics, you can see they're there holding on to the lotus. So, and there was a sacredness to the lotus that the Egyptians had. So even going back to antiquity, you see that. And then the NPS years are, Kenilworth ourselves. This is a map of the 1950s where they had the different ponds and different species and of aquatic plants in each pond. And this is what we did literally last month, Nature Fest, where we had kids from the Kenilworth area come out, and there's a little otter there, and we have beaver and stuff. And so it's really neat. We get people from all over the world and also the local neighborhood coming out. And this is us getting ready this year because the original 1913 greenhouses are still there, still maintained. And so the tank's there, so we have to take the tropicals inside in the winter and propagate them. I'll admit we do buy some too. And, and then there's a whole process where they winterize over here, and there's a little hot water bath. And then in the springtime, you have to transplant them, and then after frost is long gone, the ponds start warming up, you transplant them outside. So rangers taking notes, and learning from our maintenance staff and everything. And then a touchstone of the past. This is 16. This is 2016. So you can almost see it really hasn't changed all that much. You know, and I would be remiss in this talk if I did not do a shout out for our special friends group, the Friends of Kenilworth. Tina, thank you. Stand up. I know I'm going to put you on the spot. I hope I turn your face red. You know. Because, yeah, thanks. Because, I mean, as great as the Park Service is, you know, I mean, every federal agency is dealing with a tough budget. That's the reality. And our friends group are indispensable, you know, in organizing cleanups and helping fund things that Uncle Sam can't fund for a variety of different reasons. And I think it's testimony of the dedication of the friends group that you came to check up on me. Actually, she came out, make sure I did a shout out, but hey. And just as a final word, you know, I said how it blends with culture. You know, almost everyone at some point sends a postage. You know, we have the Postal Museum, we send a letter, right? Well, this year, the 100th anniversary of the Park Service, 2016, and the Postal Service designated 16 national parks. Get it? 2016, 16 parks. They're really clever. They don't charge 16 cents though. You know, last year, you know, we are the Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens is one of the 16. I mean, Grand Canyon is one of the 16, right? We're up there with that, man. You know, and the Sacred Lotus is featured on the stamp. We will have a big program this summer about it. The stamp will be available on June the 2nd. So here's what you want to do if you want to be at the collector. Go to Kenilworth now, because last year they debuted the Lily stamp. So you want to buy those, because once the collectors start coming for the Lotus stamp, they're going to buy out all the Lily stamps. So you want to get your Lily stamp, then come back when the Lotus stamp is there, and then you'll have both. So that way, when you're a grandparent, you can put it on eBay and make a fortune off of it. And everything. And we're looking forward to a really big ceremony. Hopefully, we'll get leaders in the Postal Service, leaders in the National Park Service coming down there. You know, we'll have some special ceremony. We're thinking about maybe having a Vietnamese dance troupe, you know, to show, you know, as a cultural relevance thing. We have a Buddhist group coming for our Lotus Festival. The Lotus Festival, the Lotus and Lily Festival is every year, and this is how you can remember it. 2016, postage stamp, one of 16 parks, and it will be on July the 16th. So you remember the number 16, then all you got to do is remember the month of July. Boom, it'll be there. And probably one of the days after that will be when we have the debut of the stamp. The stamp will have its formal debut with all the rest of the stamps in New York City on the 2nd of June. The Postal Service asked if we could wait until midsummer to do Kenilworth because, well, you want to see the lotuses, right? And so the lotuses will be out and blooming, and it's like a huge field of nothing but blooms and blossoms. So, you know, like I say, the next time when you go home, we talk about find your park, and we look at a plant. You know, think of like how the plant has touched all these, how plants have interrelated, plants we eat, plants we grow. You know, the intersection of our humanity and the green things that grow. And I don't think there's any better place to really get a sense of that where botany meets history than a visit to Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens. So I appreciate you spending some of your lunchtime here, and I hope you visit Kenilworth. And if you have any questions, you know, hang around and we'll talk about it.